Hello, this is Graham Plaster, and I am the CEO of the Intelligence Community Inc. and also Vice President for National Security and Intelligence at TDX International, which is an Alaska Native corporation doing a lot of different kinds of defense and intel services around the globe. But also in the past, I've had the pleasure of working with the Defense Language and National Security Education Office as a Senior Policy Advisor for Cultural Training. And that's where I got to meet Dr. Louise Rasmussen, who I have with me today. And I want to thank you, Louise, for joining me. And one of my other hats that I have worn is as the editor-in-chief for the Foreign Area Officer Association Journal. So all those different groups have, for different reasons, a lot to be interested in what we're going to talk about today, which is Louise's new book, which we're going to kind of tease apart. And before we get started in talking about the book that just released, I think last week, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, just last week.
So we're going to learn a little bit more about Louise and her background and her company. So Louise, could you just introduce yourself?
Thank you, Graham. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate this. I'm excited to talk to you about our book, Save Your Ammo, today. So I am a cognitive psychologist. That's my background and training. And I work for a company, a small company called Global Cognition. It's myself and my co-author of the book, Winston Seek, who's also a cognitive psychologist and a collaborator who's also been a big part of collecting a lot of the information that we're going to be talking about today that's in the book, Miss Jasmine Duran. So we're all cognitive psychologists, and what we do is we study decision-making and expertise in complex work environments. And for the last more than a decade, really, we've been working with various organizations within the DoD, focusing specifically on expertise when it comes to working with people from other cultures. So working with people who think differently and who have a different view on life and how to do things. And that is really what our book, Save Your Ammo, is really the culmination of more than a decade of research and studies looking at that problem.
How long is the book?
The book is about a little over 250 pages.
Okay, is it structured in, how are the chapters structured?
So the chapters are structured around kind of the competencies that we have pulled out through our research. So from talking to more than 200 really DoD personnel, civilians working overseas for the government, we pulled out 12 strategies or habits of mind, if you will, that it seems people tend to use, and no matter what culture, what region or area they're working in, no matter what job they really have and the kind of tasks that they're involved in, we found that there's 12 common thinking strategies that people really engage in to help them accomplish their missions and extract themselves from some of the complex situations that they find themselves in. So the book is really, it's organized around those 12 competencies. We have one chapter dedicated to each of those competencies. And just at a high level, what those competencies are generally about, it's really about how to be reflective about your reactions and the sometimes weird, strange, frustrating things that are going on around you, how to learn from your experiences, how to find and use good information to help you make decisions, and how to make sense of some of the strange things that you might come across. And of course, managing your communication, figuring out what to say, and how to get your messages across in some of these situations.
So I've had the pleasure of seeing you over the years develop these competencies and work on doing the hard work of doing all the research to back up, why these are the core competencies. And as you know, I'm working on a kind of a parallel project with the Foreign Area Officer Association to pull together a book. I think we're maybe at the 70% mark of getting an anthology of essays. And those are also based on your research, inspired by your research because years ago when I first became a foreign air officer, I heard a lecture by a senior Army '06, and he said, the real advantage of having a foreign air officer is not their language ability, it's their, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but he said their cultural adaptability and their ability to step into culturally complex situations and
Mhm.
handle that. Now, as we look back, we realize that there have been plenty of people that were placed into the foreign air officer community in the military that really language was their expertise, and maybe there were some things that they could have done to really improve on their cultural competence. Now that we have your research and we have these stories, we can actually dig into those competencies with use cases and case studies, and we can maybe find ways to improve that particular skill set. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about this book. Why'd you call it
Yeah, that's exciting.
Save Your Ammo? What's the title from?
The title, yeah, it's the title really has. We have two kind of intentions with the title. The first one is we really want to communicate that this is a practical book. It's a how-to. It's not an academic theoretical book. It's really intended to be a no-nonsense guide for making decisions and thinking when you're working across cultures. Kind of like I don't know if you're probably familiar with Major Dandridge Malone's book, Small Unit Leadership. It's a quick read, it's accessible, and it gets to points of some important practical points across fairly easily. And that's kind of what we wanted to emulate. So first of all, Save Your Ammo, it's practical. Second of all, we want to kind of, in the title, give a flavor of the an aspect of the book that we think is a little bit unique when it comes to some of the resources out there on cultural awareness or cultural competence. And that is many of those resources, the flavor kind of is sort of what someone told me the other day is kind of happy clappy. It's gives you the perspective that that working across cultures is really about accommodating and making friends. And that's one of the things that we found is that there is a different flavor of cultural competence. And when you're working in a national security context, it's really not necessarily about always being friendly or appeasing or accommodating. Sometimes that's the right way to go, and other times it's not. And it's really all about being able to make that call, make that decision. Is this the time to accommodate, or is this the time when I need to be able to pound my fists on the table and to get my point across?
Hmm.
And so that's kind of the second piece of what we're going for with the title.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've talked a little bit about the mission orientation, making sure that when you go into a culturally complex environment, that your top mission isn't just diplomacy as an end in of itself, right? To get along
Right,
with everybody is not why you're there. Now,
right,
certainly, if you can't get along with people, you could end up sabotaging your mission. You could end up
right,
walking away, burning every bridge, burning every opportunity to, build stability and peace. On the other hand, if you have a very specific mission, sometimes keeping everybody happy is impossible, and trying to be effective is actually the right thing to do. Um,
right.
what are some of the accolades that you've had for the book so far from people who have participated or had a chance to take a peek?
Well, first of all, from people who participated, so the folks who are represented in the book, their stories have had huge excitement from them about, the opportunity to share their stories and their lessons that they have learned from their many years working overseas. And then on top of that, we've been really fortunate to one of the individuals we interviewed a few years ago was General Anthony Senni, Marine Corps general, and we have shared the book with him, and he was excited enough to share a wonderful endorsement for our book that we're very pleased with. Essentially, communicating that he thinks everybody who works in the military or in diplomacy serving overseas should really read this book.
That's great. Yeah, an endorsement by General Zinni means a lot. He epitomizes so much of what we'd love to see in culturally competent and in our leaders, basically. So,
Right.
what's you kind of hinted at it. What are some of the intended audiences for the book and the uses for the book that you imagine?
Well, so we wrote the book to be targeted towards a young service man or woman who's just starting out on a career in foreign service or in serving their country overseas, and so that's kind of who the book is geared at. We think there's a bunch to be learned from other segments, leadership as well, just in terms of really getting a sense of some of the things that happen on the ground in these face-to-face engagements. One of the things kind of that's not in the book, but one of the things that we've learned from talking to folks who are at the front end of some of these engagements is that they sometimes wish that people who are back stateside, who are creating the plans or the policies that they're tasked with enacting, that they had a little bit better window or view into what actually goes on the ground. So that's another intended audience. We're essential, but we're hoping it will be picked up by folks who are just starting out. So whether that's service academies, professional military education, we think it could be valuable in that context. There's a lot of we think valuable discussions that could be had in the classroom at various levels around some of the stories and the scenarios that we include in the book.
The truth is that the military, more than so many other types of industries, puts people into culturally complex environments. Whether you're going to another country and doing things in collaboration with another foreign military, or even just operating inside a large organization, which is very diversified from people coming from across the country and dealing with people from different organizations inside the United States, from different agencies and backgrounds. The idea that cultural competence would only be useful in another country is naive, because we know that cultural competence is actually core to leadership development. And I would say that anybody who's trying to become a senior leader needs to have cultural competence. And we know from developing these competencies that these are things that are useful at every level of personal development and professional development. So I personally think that the PME pipeline, starting at the very basic levels all the way through senior leadership, should have some component of cultural competence training in it. And the question is, how can people sink their teeth into that? I think this book gives people good ways to do that with their stories.
Right. Yeah, and it turns out, I mean, so we had, in the context of the studies and the interviews that we've done, we've been so fortunate to really have a front seat to some really, really cool conversations with servicemen and women working overseas. And, we wanted to share that. And we know that the folks that we talked to really were talking to us because they wanted to share their experiences and the lessons that they've learned. And it turns out that sharing those stories is a really great idea too, from kind of an academic research perspective.
Yeah.
Because when you look at expertise, one prominent theory of what expertise is and how you develop it is through stories. Is expertise essentially is pattern matching. So people who are really good at their jobs, whether we're talking about weather forecasting or firefighting or flying an airplane or working with people from other cultures, what makes people good at it is that they have a lot of experiences. They have a lot of examples of situations where things went wrong, where they went right, and that's what makes them able to recognize new situations quickly and make decisions faster than someone who doesn't have those stories. So that's kind of part of the motivation too, is we think there's a huge learning potential to be who've never been outside of our borders. And so we're hoping giving them some stories, giving them some patterns can really help them put their best foot forward and maybe even come back even smarter than they otherwise would have.
It's interesting, sometimes people learn the most when they get to teach a class or teach something, right? Because it gives them
Yeah.
an opportunity to do the deep meditation on the topic. I suspect that the people that you've interviewed have had the opportunity to really reflect on their experiences in a way that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. And it's allowed a lot of things to surface for them and for you that are really valuable.
Yeah, that was part of, I mean, not surprising in a sense, but just really a really great aspect of doing all these interviews too is sitting down and talking to folks who are not necessarily, we talk to a lot of FAOs, we talk to diplomats and civil affairs personnel who have jobs where culture is sort of in the job description. But we also talk to a lot of folks for whom that's not the case. So all kinds of engineers, construction, sanitary engineers, Navy food service personnel working overseas, having to procure food in foreign countries, all kinds of intelligence folks and combat pilots. And for some of those folks, sitting down and talking about their challenges dealing with people in the context of their jobs, they would say, this is the first time anybody has ever asked me about this. It's so great to talk about it because it's evident that there's a perception that it's an important part of the job, but it's for many it's not a recognized piece of the job, and that's kind of like a hope we have in the background too is to kind of facilitate a conversation about how important that aspect of government military work, working with people who think differently, how important that really is.
Mm. Do you have like a really good kind of example of one of the stories that's in the book that people might be excited to hear?
Yeah, well, we have, I think there's more than 60 or 70 fun, entertaining, frustrating stories in the book. And one of them that I'll share with you today is really, it's in a chapter that we have dedicated to perspective taking, or really the chapter's title, How to Get Inside People's Heads to Gain Trust, Influence, and Cooperation. And we have several examples in there of folks stepping inside the shoes or the minds, if you will, of the people that they're working with to figure out how to deal with them and what to say. And one of the experiences that we relay in there is from an Army sergeant working on the ground in a small unit in Afghanistan. And they have just had an experience where there's been an attack, and they have lost 6 guys from their team. And so they are highly motivated to find the people responsible for this attack. And they have some local informants that they're working with that can hopefully tell them where those bad guys are located. And they sit down with them and they put a map of the area in front of them. And those local Afghans look at the map and they just look like they're lost. They're confused. They can't look at the map. And so it would be easy for someone in that situation to kind of think, oh, these Afghans are uneducated. They're maybe, incompetent when it comes to reading maps. But what this sergeant did was he kind of stepped outside of the situation, and he thought about these Afghans and how they grow up, and it just hit him. These guys they've never been up in the air. They have never seen an overhead aerial view of anything. So he took their perspective and he used that to come up with a strategy for kind of bridging that communication gap, if you will. So what he did was he took a camera and strapped it to a motorcycle helmet. He put a guy on a motorcycle and had him run around the entire neighborhood, the entire village area. And then he showed this video to the informants that he was working with. And that worked. I mean, the guys could look at that video and say, hey, take a right here and go 30 minutes that way, and then make a left. Right. So that's it's just a really great example of kind of the insight that you can get from just thinking about the people that you're working with, where they're coming from, and that can really help you get some very tangible results very quickly.
That one's interesting because on a couple different levels, because we talk about perspective taking is kind of taking the, I don't know, maybe emotional or psychological perspective, but this was taking the actual physical perspective, actually putting a camera on your head and capturing the perspective of the local person to watch it together with them.
Right.
It's fascinating use of technology to implement this cultural concept. And it reminds me in the beginning when you said laying out a map and trying to look at the map, it reminds me of something that we've talked about in the cultural training community of cultural competencies being a map itself to try to figure out how to engage with multiple types of cultures, not just one country or one type of people, but cultural competencies being a map of how to navigate, or a compass maybe, how to navigate any kind of cultural environment.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that's what these strategies are. They're culture general. They can help you no matter where you are. So that idea of taking perspective, for example, that can help you in Djibouti or Kyrgyzstan or China, you know, whatever area we're talking about. It's that's the general strategy.
So right now the book is for sale, right? And it's called Save Your Ammo. And Global Cognition is the company behind it. Where can I get a copy?
You can just hop on Amazon and type in Save Your Ammo, Working Across Cultures for National Security. It's available in Kindle format and paperback as well. It's also on Barnes and Noble, and there's a few other booksellers out there, but I think Amazon is probably the easiest place to find it.
Okay.
And yeah, if you do find it and you have a look at it and you feel inspired, we would of course very much enjoy hearing a positive review from you on Amazon. Those reviews, I know I look at them all the time. They're just super helpful for people to help them make decisions about what to buy and what not to buy.
Yeah, and we'll probably be doing a book review for the FAO Association journal, so we can also
Great.
post links there for people that want to get a copy. Any final thoughts for our audiences that might be hearing this?
Yeah. Really get the book, share your thoughts with us. It's fun. We think it's valuable. It's an easy read, and I hope it inspires you. And if it inspires you to share some of your stories with us as well, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always have an ear for a good story.
What's your website if people want to reach out?
Sure, www.globalcognition.org, and we have a contact form there as well. And my personal contact is just Louise@globalcognition.org.
All right. Thanks so much, Louise. Thanks for your time. Stay healthy, and I look forward to helping you promote this wonderful book.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Graham. I appreciate the opportunity.